Larry Haber, a reformed yet long-recovered developer and now managing partner of the Commercial Real Estate Department of AGMB Law, as well as a non-practicing CPA and the creator of Leasing Reality, conducts an ongoing series of conversations infused with rock and roll, hip-hop, sports, pop culture, and historical questions with real estate and other business rock stars, designed to empower aspiring, emerging, and seasoned professionals and business owners to build a better foundation for both today and tomorrow.
After a nearly 7-month hiatus, I'm happy to have on today as my first guest back on Real Estate Reality Check, someone who I consider to be the equivalent of the Pulp Fiction character Winston Wolf when it comes to making a difference for the restaurant industry in New York, which has been, in the words of Mick Jagger, absolutely shattered by the impact of COVID-19. Even if you have been doing your best impression of the Bubble Boy character from Seinfeld, Andrew Rigie, the executive director of the New York City Hospitality Alliance, has been like Elvis Presley. He's been everywhere. And as he goes about channeling Winston Wolf's character, the mantra of "I solve problems," for the hundreds of thousands of New York City restaurant workers and restaurants that have been devastated by the pandemic. Andrew knows that without food and beverage coming back to being an integral part of our lives and the fabric that makes New York City so great, that the road to recovery is going to be, unfortunately, a long and treacherous one. So, Andrew, getting right into it. A great line from the movie A Few Good Men is in a courtroom scene between Jack Nicholson and Tom Cruise, when Nicholson got a bit jacked up, so to speak, as the young prosecutor. Cruise was interrogating him by screaming at Tom, "You can't handle the truth." So with that as the backdrop, during your negotiations and lobbying on behalf of your constituents over the past 7 months or so, what truths have you found to be the most disturbing to you about the state of New York City?
Ooh, well, first, thank you. That was some introduction.
Yeah.
Well, that was some introduction. Thank you. The truth is that we are going through an extraordinarily challenging time with no end in sight and so much uncertainty. And in all the discussions that I've had, I think the one thing that I'd said pre-pandemic to elected officials all the time is, everyone loves to say, "I love small business. We must preserve our mom and pop shops. We need to support them. They are the backbone of our neighborhoods, our communities, our economy. We must do everything possible to support them." But so often, so many of those same people ended up enacting policies that made it more and more difficult for those exact types of businesses to survive. Then COVID hit. And I think there was a, "oh, wow" moment. We could potentially lose thousands upon thousands of these beloved small businesses. And I think something clicked and they started to get it. And there had been a lot more of a focus, momentum to actually enact policies to help restaurants and bars. With that being said, we've had a lot of success. We'll probably discuss some of the policies that have been enacted, but there's still so much more work to do. And the truth is, if the industry is not engaged, is not involved, and is not advocating for itself, they are going to get lost among the countless other voices that do not have an organized organization there fighting for them. So I think the truth is, one, people really recognize how critically important restaurants and nightlife are to New York City. And two, if you want to turn that love and understanding into meaningful policies, you need to have an organization, you need to be unified, you need to be active and engaged and make your voice heard.
Amen, my friend. So I spend a good portion of my day essentially talking landlords and tenants off the ledge, so to speak, when it comes to lease restructurings and having empathy for the person sitting on the other side of the table. And that's whether I'm representing, a landlord or a tenant. But too often, I'm quoting the line from The Godfather. It seems like 5 times a day by both Robert Duvall and Al Pacino as Michael Corleone, namely that of, it's not personal, Sonny, it's strictly business. So with that all said, given your daily trials and tribulations, how do you go about yourself not taking things personally? And what suggestions do you have for landlords and tenants not to as well?
Yeah, I mean, not taking things personally, it's tough. I think especially in this industry, when someone owns a restaurant or in my business, you're out there 24/7 fighting on behalf of people, really trying to save their future. People say things, they do things, you're often in these impossible no-win situations. And it's tough, but you know what? You can't take things personally. It really is business. And you know what? If you take things personally, it could impact your ability to fight and to advocate. And, people can be jerks. So if they do say something and you take it somewhat personally, you know what? People are people. What are you going to do? You got to keep on trucking through. What do I say to people and what do I try to do for people? Just be there. I often joke around, but it's not really a joke. I'm somewhat of a restaurateur therapist. And I think we need to listen to people. And I think landlords and tenants, there's always the dollars. There's always the agreement. There's always the more technical aspect of that relationship, the lease. But at the end of the day, this is so much more that we are going through as a city, as a nation, as a world dealing with this pandemic than our individual situation. And New York City will not recover unless our city's restaurants are at the core of that recovery. So I think the restaurant.
That's the bottom line,
Yeah.
Because why does someone live in the city? For the vibe, for the coolness, for the architecture, for the culture, for the food and beverage, the different experiences. Exactly. Forgetting about what was working in retail and what wasn't working in retail pre-COVID, it was all about the experience. I refer to it as the Jimmy, as in Jimi Hendrix. Have you ever been experienced? That's what people want. And without having that, it's a tough road. There's no question about it.
Exactly. So I think we need to understand when they come together as tenants and they come together as landlords saying, yes, this is about our individual business relationship, but it's also about something much bigger here. It's about how do we help our city recover? And I think there's going to have to be a lot of give and take. Unfortunately, you hear a lot of negative stories, but I think there's also some really good stories where you hear about landlords and tenants working together and coming up with some sort of agreement to allow that business to stay in place, fight for their future, but also allow the landlord to meet their obligations as best as possible. So I think that's going to be really important. And I think you said it before, empathy.
Rap legend Busta Rhymes has a song called We Could Take It Outside. Camila Cabello, Madonna, Phil Collins, they have a song called Inside, and Frank Sinatra, John Legend, I think Kelly Clarkson and Michael Bublé, I don't think I've used him before, among others, have a song called Baby Cold Outside. There's a theme here, okay? So I want to hear your thoughts about New York City. Just this week, I know, you're sharp, my friend, how they metaphorically channeled the band Bare Naked Ladies and their song Take It Outside when it comes to making outdoor dining a year-round permanent part of our landscape. Is it going to work?
I absolutely.
At least over the coming months.
Yeah.
It's great that they have.
I mean, look, the first part of it that's so important is the legislation is extending the outdoor dining program for another year until the end of September 2021. That's going to let these restaurants, try to generate enough revenue to keep them afloat, but also keep a vibrancy on the city streets. The other thing the legislation does do approves the use of propane and other types of heating units, because as the weather drops, people are not going to sit outside unless they can stay warm. Understandably, while still frustratingly, if that's a word, there are many requirements, and there could be some hurdles to restaurants using outdoor heaters. So not every restaurant's going to benefit, but for those that are able to set them up, it's certainly going to help. It's going to extend how late into the season they can serve people outdoors comfortably. It'll also help them start opening up. You know, who knows, January, February, it may be icy cold. People don't want to be outside. But as it starts warming up, bam, you turn the heat lamps on and you can serve people out there. So that's going to be important. But then the more long-term framework of that legislation requires the city go through a process to develop a permanent outdoor dining program. And I think it's absolutely phenomenal. We can learn what works, what hasn't worked with this temporary outdoor program. But then it really allows us to reimagine how we use this outdoor space in the city of New York to help our small businesses, to help jobs, and to create this more livable, vibrant, resilient city. And I go to all different neighborhoods and people just love the outdoor dining. It's really helped transform our city streets and our streetscape. And I think so much for the better.
Yeah, listen, it's going to be, listen, the stress breeds opportunity. So hopefully, people are going to be very creative here. But listen, I'm someone who's a tailgater, whose kids played sports, so I stood on the sidelines. I go skiing, and the clothes they have right now, if you're into all that, are relatively thin, but you could be outside in cold weather. So it's whether the mindset is going to change for many. I'm out here in the bubble on Long Island, and one of my clients has a restaurant nearby that I could walk to, and 2 weeks ago on a Thursday, the place was jamming. Everyone was basically outside, maybe, 4 or 5 tables inside when there's 25 or so. But it was jamming. It was 55 degrees last Thursday. I went again, 4 people were there. 4 tables were being served at the same time, 7 o'clock. So I'm hoping that people get out, get adventurous, okay? And do their thing, which leads into my next thing. My next question is, people's mindsets and social behaviors, they've changed, during 2020, and with props out to a few Springsteen songs, do you feel that people will get out on the street and embrace this, this new basically pedestrian mall concept in New York? Or they're going to be like channeling that other Springsteen song, 10th Avenue Freeze Out?
No, I think there will. The good thing about New York City is there's a lot of people, and there's a lot of people with different opinions and a lot of people that do different things. So, I think there's a lot of people that will be comfortable being outside. I think it's going to be somewhat of an adventure. I think also particularly this winter and going into, next spring, we're still in a pandemic, and I think that changes people's behavior. So I don't know, 3 years from now, more people, if we have a permanent outdoor dining, they'll be more comfortable eating outside, staying outside in the cold. But I think that people, even this season will say, you know what, I really want to go out. I want to eat, drink. I want to socialize, that human connection. I may not be comfortable doing it inside. And as long as I can eat outdoors in a nice dining installation and there's heat, why not? It's fun. You know what? We've changed a lot of our habits. There's a lot of things we're probably doing these days that 7 months ago, pre-pandemic, we wouldn't have done. So I think so. I think there'll definitely be an impact. It's not going to be perfect. It's not going to be easy, but I'll be out there eating in the cold.
Yeah, we're resilient. So I'm a firm believer that a good percentage of something is better than 100% of nothing. Okay, and however well intended, as far as the newly implemented capacity limitation in New York City for dining, not quite sure if it's going to fully allow them to get back on their feet. Remember, if a head chef of a restaurant, I'm using an arbitrary number, makes $100,000, does that mean his or her salary should be chopped to $25,000 because that's what the capacity is? Fixed costs are fixed costs. How are we going to deal with all this? It's just, because you're dealing with the everydays. So you're feeling the pain. You're sharing stories every day, I'm sure.
Yeah, no, that's right. Listen, you often in the kitchen will need, the same amount of labor if you have 25% occupancy as 50% occupancy, or even 75, in some cases, even 100% occupancy. So none of the numbers make sense. A lot of restaurateurs call me up. They, play out these different scenarios. They ask questions about this regulation, about that, what's going to happen in the future, why'd that happen like that in the past. And I tell people, stop trying to make sense of everything, or you're going to drive yourself completely nuts. You got to try to take the present moment and do everything you possibly can in it to survive. 25%, it's not enough. Hopefully, based on what the governor had said, we are going to get to 50% indoor occupancy in the city of New York, like the rest of New York State restaurants have had since back in June, around November 1st. With these increased infection rates in a couple of neighborhoods, that certainly is going to influence it. We'll have to see what happens there. But to step back and put it in perspective, 25% occupancy, 50, 75%. None of this is going to save the industry. Pre-pandemic, when restaurants had 100% indoor occupancy, it was difficult enough for so many to survive. So we're going to continue to need ongoing support for these businesses. There's a bill passed through the House of Representatives called the Restaurants Act, a $120 billion grant fund to help pay for rent, utilities, labor, vendor, all these other types of expenses. We need the federal government to act and get cash into these business owners' pockets to pay for their upcoming expenses and all the debt that they've already, built up. And the last thing I'll say on that is, restaurants were not shut down because they had a bad burger, or Larry went and said, I don't like this service, or, that's not the pasta I ordered, I'm not coming back here. They shut down because government mandated they shut down. Now, we need that same exact government to help support us as we open up so we can stay open and then recover fully and hopefully get back to pre-pandemic operations with some important modifications and support moving forward.
Yeah, so along those lines, former President Reagan, I don't get too political, but he was known as the great communicator. And one of his lines was that government is not a solution to our problem. Government is the problem. But in this case, government needs to be the solution. As you know, the Restaurant Act, believe it or not, everyone, is an acronym. I think it stands for Real Economic Support that acknowledges unique restaurant assistance needed to survive Act of 2020. Yeah, it's crazy, but I think I actually got it right. Okay. So this bill has been lingering, I think, since July, and I'm fairly certain. I know it's Pelosi. I know has it. It's in their numbers, and I think actually, with all her conversations with Mnuchin, they agree also. So hopefully, it's coming. How it's going to be administered, I don't know, but I've been sitting there saying there needs to be 4 parties to this dance. Since the beginning, when you and I talked back in March and April, landlords, tenants, oh yeah, the banks, and oh yeah, the government. Okay. It's time to, like David Bowie it and Let's Dance, if you remember that song. We need to have 4 parties to this dance. So hopefully that's going to happen soon. So we're going to do a little bit of counterpoint here. I'm going to keep it a little clean. Not like name calling. If you remember back on Saturday Night Live, I don't know if you're old enough, but the original Saturday Night Live, there was a thing called, counterpoint with Dan Aykroyd and Jane Curtin. Okay. So, and the subject is that of the New York City Council and then the mayor passing what's called 1932A this past May and being extended. It was going through September 30th. And now it's going through March of 2021. And essentially, it put a moratorium on good guy guarantees because they didn't want these restaurateurs to basically, we'll call it, lose their house and have their personal assets attacked because of all the tumult they're going through. Landlords are advocating against it in a big way because they think, essentially, listen, forgetting about the holes in it, they feel it was an unconstitutional exercise of police power. Sorry for the boring rap, because it interferes with this private contract between landlord and tenant. So you take the tenant side, I'll take the landlord side. Represent tenant 2-1, but I'm going to take the landlord side. Your turn. Why is this such a good law in New York City?
Well, first off, when any tenants sign that, they could not have contemplated they were going to be in this type of situation. That's the first example. And it would be an absolute moral tragedy if we don't have small business owners only losing their business, but then the ability of the landlord to go after their personal assets. And I'll tell you something, early on, I spoke with landlords and said, oh my goodness, in this situation, I would never go after someone personally. And I think that is the right approach, but obviously you also need a legal protection there. So I think, one, if this law didn't pass, there would have been many otherwise successful restaurateurs that are trying to fight through this and come out on the other side that would have just tossed in their keys, fulfilled that obligation, and boom, gotten out of it. This has provided actually somewhat of a safety net in that sense, I think, for some landlords too, to give their business or the restaurant owner or the other small business some time to try to figure out what's happening here. And I got to tell you, with all these vacant storefronts that are currently there and that are going to come to market, if we don't keep some of these restaurants and other great small businesses in place, the whole entire commercial market's going to continue to tank. So that's kind of a long way of saying that people need support and they need protection, especially when they could not have contemplated a situation where they would have been mandated by government for 7 months and they're still not fully open. Who knows when they're going to be? So I think it's a common sense protection. I can understand from a landlord's perspective why maybe they don't like it. But at the end of the day, sometimes we need to look at bigger picture societal issues than one-off specific issues for the betterment of society.
You know the expression, there's 3 sides to every story, yours, mine, and the truth. There's not 3 sides here. There's hundreds and thousands of sides to this story. Part of the problem that landlords have with this, is that, hey, when I gave you tenant, $50 a square foot for a tenant improvement allowance and 6 to 9 months of free rent and paid the brokers, it's because I knew in the short term that, maybe that you were going to pay that back to me if you didn't last a year or 2. So, that's part of the problem that a landlord has. But and this is the other side to the story. This law screams out. So the government is in one sense taking sides. They're saying tenants, we're having empathy for tenants, we're not having empathy for landlords. And that's part of the problem, which then leads us back to what's going to be good about the Restaurant Act. It's basically why all parties need to work together. The Restaurant Act has to come through, and it has to come through soon.
Clearly, it's a very nuanced situation. In a perfect world, yes, the federal government would have come in, pumped money in, so the whole entire economic ecosystem that revolves around restaurants, from the landlords to the vendors to the employees, would have been able to be made whole or close thereto, and things could have gone on in normal. But we are in a situation so far from that reality, we have to accept what the reality is. And, once you start getting into these back and forth, is it fair to this person? Is it fair to that person? I could just start arguing on the other side all of these different laws that have been passed that really favor the landlord community, or all of these other bills that have been kicking around for years that I know the landlord community doesn't like, that would help support these small businesses. So we can always get into that back and forth, but I think at the end of the day, people sign these leases and with these guarantees in a different world. And if we were not putting this protection in place, it would have devastating economic, societal, and so many other types of crises that it would influence, that while everything's imperfect, it's the best solution in a very bad scenario. And hopefully we can get these places back up and running so they're able to start paying their rent and everything, because like I hear from landlords, even though there's tons of vacant spaces, they would much rather have a good tenant there than no tenant at all. And if that's true, then
exactly. I so agree with that. I think a lot of landlords, unfortunately, they're slowly coming around to buying into that. I have a few theories, and one of them is the drive-in movie theater theory, but it's a good percentage of something's better than 100% than nothing that comes with vacant space. Having vacant space is like going to an old drive-in movie theater, by yourself with a taxi cab driver, watching the movie while you're both wearing or not wearing masks. It makes no sense. So I hear you loud and clear.
Hey, could you just help me resolve this issue with the landlord work letter?
Why don't you come back later?
Okay.
Hey, can you help me with this letter of intent?
Not now.
Hey Rich, can you please help me with this good guy guarantee language?
Not now. There should be a better place for my brokers to get these answers.
Now there is. Leasing Reality. Master your leasing domain. This podcast is powered by Leasing Reality. Tough negotiation? Invest in your career, whether you're an aspiring, emerging, or seasoned commercial real estate professional, by mastering the preparation and negotiation of a letter of intent and the business aspects of a lease from both the landlord and tenant perspective. Watch, listen, and/or read Leasing Reality's content at your own speed. Learn more at leasingreality.com.
Props out to some of the greatest TV mothers and fathers over the last 25 years, whether Peg Bundy, Marge Simpson, Dan Connor, Ray Barone, and Tony Soprano. My question is mom and pop retail dead? And assuming your answer is no, it's not dead, tell us why you have hope for the mamas and papas.
It's never going to be dead. It's never going to be dead. I think the challenge is it's gotten so difficult over the years for mom and pop operators to survive in the city of New York, really in neighborhoods throughout the 5 boroughs. There's always people that are going to be out there and try to do it. I think we need to kind of flip that question somewhat into what are we going to do coming out of this crisis that will make it easier, not easy, but easier for mom and pop small businesses to survive, especially in the city of New York. And perhaps with this crisis, there's going to be somewhat of a reset in the commercial real estate market. Honestly, that was a barrier, price of real estate. And I'm not blaming the landlord community, but that was a barrier for many small businesses to start opening up and to survive long term. So if there is some sort of reset and the rents come down a little bit more, I think it'll support them. I think things like the open restaurants, the outdoor dining program, to get a sidewalk cafe permit, it used to cost and still does, technically more money to rent the sidewalk with consent fees that you pay the city than you may be paying for your real estate indoors. So this program is free for restaurants to participate. So there's not that barrier. We also showed that you can cut the red tape. You can kick through some of this bureaucracy by streamlining the permitting process. And it took a crisis to find this out. We've known it all along, but I think now more policymakers have figured it out. So there's that old Churchill saying, quote, don't let a good crisis go to waste. And I think we need to use this crisis to reimagine how city, state, and federal government interacts with the restaurant industry, help streamline that process. Fines that are unnecessary, get them out of there. Focus on education and training. Provide a business owner a cure period or a warning before you just issue a violation. And list goes on and on and on. And I think if we're able to seize this moment in this crisis to reimagine that relationship between government's regulation of the restaurant industry and the restaurant industry, hopefully it will allow more of these mom and pops to come back and survive. But it's going to be tough. We're going to lose a lot more of them during this crisis, but mom and pop's not dead, and people also crave it. For all the things that are good about the chain stores that people like, why they're so popular, why people order online, there's nothing like going to that neighborhood restaurant where the guy and his family and his wife and everyone are there, almost every day. They know your name, the local bookstore where you get that attention. And as much as they train people in these larger chains, you don't get that same feeling, and people crave it. And it's one of the reasons why they love New York.
Oh yeah, it's like Cheers, where it's like everyone feels they know them. No,
Yep.
so I hear you loud and clear. So we take a different approach. Just, let's get off of that for a while. So borrowing a line from the movie Meet the Fockers, starring Ben Stiller and De Niro, if you could only have four people from any time in history in your circle of trust, who would they be? Why?
Ooh, that's a good one. You remind me of all these great songs and these movies and these TV shows. Listen, the Churchill quote, I was just reading a book, City of Ambition, about FDR and LaGuardia. I think, especially right now, having one or both of them here would just be incredibly powerful to talk to them about how they brought a city and a nation through another crisis that was unprecedented. And who else? Grandfather, grandmother. I come from a bakery family. My grandmother was, tough as nails, running this small business, talk about mom and pops. And she just always told it like it was, tough as nails, worked hard, but had a real, that again, kind of depression mentality coming out of it, and that world growing up, Lower East Side in Brooklyn. And I think in today's world, with everything that's going on, having people from our last big crisis around me, whether it's like an FDR, LaGuardia, my grandmother, and others, would be incredibly helpful to be able to say, we've gone through crisis before. This is what we did. This is how we made it through. And you will too. Just keep on fighting.
Exactly. Well said, my friend. So I think at some level of the line, I got a boogie from the song, I Love the Nightlife, applies to us, but it also applies to being, an integral part of New York, and why retail, the experiential places, and why event spaces pre-COVID, why they flourished. People love that interaction, that experience. But sadly, as the Dylan song goes, the times are changing. So with that long-winded preface behind us, if you had a rose-colored crystal ball, and tainted with a little thing called reality, what do you see in the forecast for nightlife in the next few years? Event space, concerts.
I mean, this is even more difficult than restaurants, because who knows? I mean, these are social spaces where the whole point is coming together, being close in these types of spaces. I mean, social distance dancing, it's not really what most people crave. It's also a place where people go out and they find themselves. They find out who they are. They express themselves. And it's so much more than just a business nightlife. It's really a place where people socialize and they're humans, to their core. So it's going to be a long recovery, because who knows when these establishments are going to start opening up. It's like what I said earlier with the uncertainty. Hopefully we can continue to contain the virus, these areas where we've seen infection rates go up, we get them under control and drive them down. But there's another bill that passed Congress called Save Our Stages Act, which is a similar grant fund to help more of these music venues, nightlife venues. So it's going to be dire. Again, a lot of loss, but this is at the core of who we are as humans. So the industry will definitely come back. And maybe, in a positive way. People have been saying New York City nightlife's dead. We're not the city that never sleeps. There's no big clubs, or they moved out of Manhattan. Now they're in Brooklyn. And, that tends to also be a generational thing. It's never the way you remember it. Meanwhile, there's people that are out enjoying the nightlife, or were out enjoying the nightlife. So we will come back. Maybe there's some sort of reset. Like I said, if rents do come down, it creates more opportunities for people to just go out there and do nightlife and be creative, and have to focus less on the business aspect of it. So you have more, I don't want to say authentic, how do I say it? You just have a more kind of grassroots nightlife than, say, what a big corporate entity is able to provide.
Listen, there's definitely going to be a redistribution of wealth there. Rents are going to come down. It's just, what comes up must come down. And the reality is it was starting to pre-COVID, and now it's just accelerated, especially, in the retail sector. Listen, a building portfolio on Madison Avenue that I think he still secured, just marketed, went to contract, okay, for $45 million. That number doesn't mean anything. What means something is that it went for roughly $1,400 a square foot on Madison Avenue. I think it was 7 or 8 years ago, that type of space in the immediate area would have sold for $7,500. $1,400 to $7,500. That's how big a drop there is. You know, it's like, so the times are changing, and that's going to enable the rents. And I don't think that's just an outlier. I think it's going to be, you know, I don't think it's dramatic necessarily, but you're going to see a lot of that. Listen, the people who did well in resolution trust days in the early 90s were the people who were opportunistic, and they were able to take advantage, the people who had money, but they were then able to, you know, and the same thing has happened historically. You know, so it will happen. It's not if, it's when.
Fortunately, the way the world works sometimes is, you know, what's unfortunate for people today may result in other people's fortune in the future.
Yes, exactly. I think the Grateful Dead has a line in a song called St. Stephen, one man gathers what another man spills. Not quite on point, but close enough. I always wanted to say that. So anyway, we're in the home stretch here. So seemingly there's been a little bit of a Bruce Springsteen's theme here with some of the things I've referred to. So let's focus on what I'm going to call a new segment, and that's called our Growing Up COVID segment. Okay, and a line in the song of the same name, sans COVID, of course, from Springsteen goes, "When they said sit down, I stood up." So with little time to ponder that line, Andrew, what are you most proud of as you've stood up during COVID-19, and, you know, and then also how have you grown up during this period?
Well, most proud, just being able to be there for people and help people. I mean, the thing that keeps me going, I get such nice messages from people, even when I can't solve all their issues. You know, the fact that they know we're out there fighting around the clock for them and that they really appreciate it. You know, I've always had such great relationships with people, but I think in trying times, it even brings people closer together. So I think the relationships that I've been able to even build upon with people, but then the new relationships that I've built and the feeling that we've come together and we're really fighting for the industry in a way that we never did, or fortunately never had to in the past, and just optimistic and feel proud and good about how these relationships will carry on into the future. And also knowing that for all the doom and gloom and everyone saying, oh, New York City's over, New York City's this, New York City's that, knowing so many people that are on the ground, that are in the trenches with me, and like, that's not happening. You know, we'll go through a tough time, but we're not over. You know, every day we're still just getting started.
Well, yeah, it's not if, it's when, and, you know, sometimes different is good. You know, and it's going to be different. That's the reality. Yep. So back in 1973, Tug McGraw, who was this charismatic relief pitcher for the Mets, he was their closer, and he was the future father of country icon Tim McGraw. He rallied the fan base of the Mets, and actually much of New York City around him, whether you were a Met fan or not. And he had this battle cry, and the battle cry was, "You gotta believe." Okay, it was not only his request, but it was demand. Okay, so with props out to Tug and also the band Journey as well. Please tell us why New Yorkers should embrace Tug's mantra while also doing so with the song title, "Don't Stop Believing."
Well, one thing I'll say, our president of our organization, my dear friend Melba Wilson, she owns a restaurant up in Harlem called Melba's, great place. She was on 60 Minutes early on in the pandemic, and she said something, and I kind of still get the chills when I think about it. And she says, you know, my grandmother told me when I was growing up, when going through difficult times, you know, honey, this too shall pass. And you know what? This too shall pass. And we need to seize this moment, seize the challenges to build back a stronger, more resilient city. And we need to believe, because if you don't believe, then you don't believe, and what else are you going to do? I mean, humans, it's human nature. We need hope. We need to be fighting. And like I said before, you can look back at generation after generation. They all had their crises. They've gotten through it. We will do the same exact thing. And I just know way too many people that are so committed to the city, so committed to making it the best place, that they not only believe in me, but I believe in them. And collectively, we believe in the city. And we're New Yorkers, and that's just kind of how it is.
Exactly. Where there's life, there's hope. Amen, my friend.
Yeah, and he's
Good
not
talking
in
to you. Thanks for
And I'll say
coming on.
one
I
thing.
appreciate it.
I'll say one last thing, if you don't mind. You know, there's well, it's more of a Philly thing than a New York City thing. People always say, "How are you doing?" I go, "You ever watch the Rocky movies?" And I always think of, Rocky Balboa, especially when he went to Russia to fight Ivan Drago, and he keeps getting knocked down, but he keeps getting up, getting knocked down. And I think that's what we do, is we get knocked down, we keep getting up, and we're going to continue to do it, and we're going to do it together.
Amen. Have a great day, my friend.
So, thanks, Larry.
Please know that it would be greatly appreciated if you could kindly download, subscribe, rate, and review Real Estate Reality Check on Apple Podcasts by way of the episode page, podcast page, or rerealitycheck.com. The content of this podcast is intended for informational purposes only. It is not intended to solicit business or to provide legal advice. Our listeners should not take or refrain from taking any legal action based upon the information contained in this podcast without first seeking professional counsel. Prior results do not guarantee future success. Are you on the search for dynamic legal representation for you and/or your business? Abrams, Garfinkel, Margolis, Bergson LLP's full-service law firm is dedicated to smart, practical, and cost-effective counsel, providing the highest level of legal services to its clients. The AGMB team primarily represents clients in residential and commercial real estate transactions, banking, brokerage, and mortgage compliance, as well as entertainment industry services. AGMB has offices located in New York, Long Island, and California. Learn more and visit agmblaw.com today.